Wyoming Territory, July 1874. The sun had just dipped behind the Tetons, casting long shadows over the dry earth, when the townsfolk started laughing again. Jessa Darnell kept her head down and her hands busy, scrubbing the wooden countertop of the boarding house kitchen until her knuckles turned red. The laughter came from the saloon across the dusty road, the same laughter that always followed when someone mentioned her name, or worse, her smile. "Ain't she the one with the busted teeth?" someone had said 2 nights ago. "Looks like a mule kicked her face in." They had not known she was within earshot, or maybe they had. At 22, Jessa had learned to live with the quiet sting of it. Her 2 front teeth had cracked when she was 9, falling from her father's runaway wagon during a storm. They never healed right. By 16, both parents were dead from cholera, and she was left with nothing but a crumbling house and the memory of a time when people had spoken to her without smirking behind their hands. Now she cooked and cleaned for the boarding house in Jackson, Wyoming, working from sunup to sundown. She never smiled unless she was alone. The door creaked open and a gust of dry wind followed a tall man into the kitchen. "Ma'am," he said, voice low, uncertain. She turned, wiping her hands on her apron. He was younger than most of the ranch hands that pass through here, maybe 25, with a lean build, sun-browned skin, and eyes the color of river rock. His hat was dusted with trail miles and a rifle was slung across his back. "Looking for a meal?" she asked. He nodded. "And a room?" "Name's Porter Talcott. Just drove cattle up from Fort Bridger. There's stew on the stove. Room'll be ready in an hour." "Much obliged." He paused, looking at her face just a second too long. Jessa turned away, cheeks burning. She knew what he was seeing. Some of her back teeth were gone too, and her front ones had a jagged line down the middle. She hardly opened her mouth when she spoke, but instead of turning back toward the dining room, he stepped closer. "You cook all this yourself?" he asked. "I do. Smells like home." She reached for the ladle, unsure how to take the compliment. Most men left it at thanks and moved on. She handed him a bowl without another word. Porter took it, but did not leave. He looked around the kitchen, then found a crate to sit on. "You from here?" he asked between bites. "Lived here most of my life." He nodded, kept eating. The silence stretched, but it was not uncomfortable, just quiet, like he was not in a hurry to be anywhere. "You ride alone?" she asked. "For now. My brother's got a place down in Rawlins. I'm heading there after I rest a bit." That night, Porter ate 2 bowls and helped her carry water without being asked. He did not stare at her teeth. He just watched her hands, asked about the town, and offered to fix the back gate that hung crooked off its hinges. He stayed 3 days. On the 4th, Jessa stepped out back at dawn to find him hammering the last nail in the gate. He looked up when he heard her boots in the dirt. "Morning," he said. "You do not have to keep fixing things." "I want to." She looked down at her hands. "Folks might start talking." "They already do." "I heard what those men said the other night." Her shoulders stiffened. She turned to leave. "Jessa." He said her name like it was something soft. She stopped. "I think you have the sweetest smile I have ever seen." She spun around, eyes wide. You cannot mean that." He stepped forward, taking off his hat. "I do. No one says things like that to me." "Well, they are fools." He looked straight at her. "You smile like someone who has survived fire and still found a way to be kind." Her throat closed up. She had no words for that. So she just stood there, eyes wet, heart pounding. "I'm not trying to flatter you," he said. I noticed. First night I came in here, you looked at me the way no one else did, like I was not just another pair of boots in the dirt." She laughed, short and breathless. "That is because I was trying not to show my teeth." "Well, you failed. I saw them, and I liked them." Jessa covered her mouth with her hand, smiling through her fingers. He reached out, gently pulling her hand down. Please do not hide it, not from me. She had not been touched in years. Not like this. I have never had anyone say something kind about me, she whispered. You deserve more than kindness, Jessa. You deserve someone who sees you. Her chest felt tight. She had spent so long being invisible. Now this stranger with his quiet voice and gentle hands was looking at her like she was the only thing in the world worth noticing. Why are you really still here? She asked. He hesitated. Then, because I do not want to leave. Just then, a sharp cry rang out from inside the boarding house. A small voice, high and panicked. Jessa turned fast. That's Willa. She ran inside with Porter close behind. In the side room, a little girl of about 6 sat on the floor, tears running down her face, clutching her ankle. Jessa dropped beside her. What happened? I fell, Willa sobbed, off the stairs. Porter knelt too, already checking the girl's ankle. It is swollen, he said. Might be twisted, but not broken. Jessa cradled the girl close. It is all right, baby, I've got you. Willa clung to her. Do not let Mr. Griggs send me away. You are not going anywhere, Jessa said fiercely. She looked up at Porter. She was left here 6 months ago. Her mother died on the way to Montana. Mr. Griggs lets her stay if I keep working, but he has no patience for her. She can come with us, Porter said without hesitation. What? I mean it. You want to come with me to Rawlins, start over? I have land, a small house. It is not much, but it is mine. Jessa looked at him, stunned. You do not even know me. I know enough. I know you are strong. I know you are kind. I know you are not afraid to fight for people who need you. He looked down at Willa, then back at her. Come with me. Her heart beat so fast it hurt. Is this real? Porter stood, lifting Willa into his arms like she weighed nothing. As real as it gets. Jessa stared at the two of them dust in the window light, this man and this child who already trusted him, and something in her chest finally cracked open. She nodded. Yes, he smiled. Then it is settled. And for the first time in years, she smiled wide, unafraid. Porter saw it, really saw it, and he never looked away. The wagon Porter borrowed came from a retired trader who owed him a favor. It rattled more than it rolled, and the canvas cover had been patched with old flour sacks, but it held together well enough for the road south. They left town 2 hours before sunup, while the streets were still empty and the sky just beginning its slow turn to blue. Jessa sat beside Porter on the buckboard. Willa curled against her with the quilt she had sewn from scraps at the boarding house. The child had stopped crying sometime after they crossed the first ridge, lulled by the rhythm of the trail and the security of Jessa's arm around her. Porter drove without speaking for a long while, hands loose on the reins, eyes fixed toward the mountains to the southeast. The silence wasn't heavy. It had the shape of thought, of two people turning over what they'd done and what might come next. You always this quiet? Jessa asked, her voice low so as not to stir Willa. He glanced sideways. Only when I'm figuring something out. What are you working on? Wondering how a person like you ended up in a place like that. She didn't answer right away. The road narrowed through a stand of firs, and they listened to the branches whisper as they passed. Too many things went wrong one after another, she said at last. By the time I realized how far I'd fallen, I didn't know how to climb out. You climbed, he said simply. Only because you reached down. Porter didn't argue. He just clicked his tongue and urged the horses forward again. They stopped near midday by a creek thick with cattails and dragonflies. Willa stirred, blinking sleepily, and Jessa helped her down from the wagon while Porter unpacked a slab of bread and jerky wrapped in oilcloth. The girl waded ankle-deep in the creek, lifting her skirt in one hand and pointing at minnows darting through the shallows. Jessa sat on a flat stone nearby, tearing the bread in half. "You're certain about Rawlins?" she asked. He nodded, folding his long legs beneath him. "It's not much. Dry land mostly, but it's mine. Got a shed out behind the house we can fix into a room for her. I know a man who'll sell me a milk cow cheap. You've thought this through. I had time those nights I stayed on, watching the way you moved around that place, the way you looked at her like she was yours. Jessa's eyes found Willa. She is. In every way that matters. Porter leaned back on his elbows. Then let's make sure she has a home that fits her. That night, they camped beneath cottonwoods near a bend in the river. The fire was small, just enough to warm supper and keep the dark at bay. Willa fell asleep curled close to Jessa, thumb tucked beneath her chin, the quilt pulled to her ears. Porter sat across the fire, his rifle laid beside him, the glow of the flames painting his face in copper and shadow. "You ever think about marrying?" she asked suddenly, her voice almost lost in the crackle of wood he didn't shift. "I did, once. 5 years back, she chose someone else." Jessa didn't press. She waited. "Wasn't her fault," he added after a moment. "I wasn't ready." "Didn't have anything to offer then, not even a roof." "Would you be ready now?" The question hung between them. He looked up, met her eyes. "If the right woman asked, I'd marry her tomorrow." Jessa felt her pulse rise, but her voice stayed steady. "And if she didn't ask, I'd wait." However long it took. She folded her hands in her lap, the firelight catching the tiny creases in her knuckles. "I've never thought of myself as the asking kind. You don't have to be." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You've already said yes once." "That's more than I expected." "You mean when I agreed to come with you?" He nodded. "I said yes because you gave me a way out," she said. "But now, I'm wondering if maybe you're also a way in." Porter didn't smile. He just looked at her like he was memorizing something. "I'm not going anywhere without you," he said. Jessa felt the fire's warmth on her skin, but it was his words that settled into her bones. She reached across the space between them, her fingers brushing his. He took her hand gently, held it like it was something breakable and precious. Neither of them said anything else that night. They didn't need to. The next morning they passed a trapper's cabin abandoned and half collapsed. Jessa pointed at the broken door hanging on one hinge. "Looks like what's left of my old life." Porter said nothing, but he reached out and laid his hand over hers where it rested on her skirt. She didn't pull away. By the time they reached the wide, flat plains edging toward Rawlins, Willa had learned to hum while she counted clouds, and Jessa had started to laugh quietly with her head tilted back, eyes closed. Not hiding anything. Porter didn't try to capture the sound. He just listened. The sky over Rawlins was pale and wind scoured when they arrived, all three of them coated in trail dust and sun. The house stood a mile south of town, a squat 2-room structure with a lean-to shed, rough plank walls silvered by years of wind. A rusted horseshoe hung above the threshold, nailed there by Porter's own hand when he'd first claimed the land. Jessa stepped down from the wagon and helped Willa to the ground. The child's legs were stiff from the ride, and she leaned against Jessa's side until she found her footing. Porter was already untying the mules and leading them toward the small corral near the shed. "Doesn't look like much," Porter said as he returned, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "It looks like something we can build on," Jessa answered, eyes tracing the roofline, not shying from the sagging porch or the cracked window pane. "That's more than I ever had." Inside, the air smelled of dry earth and old wood. The front room held a stove, a table, and a low shelf with a dented coffee pot and 3 cups. A cot stood in the corner, its blanket folded tight. The back room was smaller, empty but for the narrow window that looked west. Porter carried in the bags and set them by the wall. "We can clear the shed tomorrow. If we patch the roof, I think it'll hold through the fall." Jessa nodded. She reached into one of the sacks and pulled out a small cloth bundle. I brought lavender from behind the boarding house. I figured it might keep the flies down. Good thinking, he said, watching her unwrap it and tuck the stems into a cracked ceramic jar by the window. Willa sat on the floor, legs crossed, turning a small stick of charcoal over in her hands. Can I draw on the wall? Porter raised an eyebrow. Only the back one, Jessa said. We'll paint over it later. He crouched beside Willa. Go ahead, sweetheart. Make it yours. That evening they sat on the porch as the wind died and the sky settled into dusk. Jessa had boiled beans over the stove and sliced what was left of the bread. Willa ate with her feet swinging off the edge of the porch, crumbs falling into her lap. You get many neighbors out here? Jessa asked, watching a hawk tilt along the horizon. Nearest one's a widow who keeps goats half a mile east. She minds her own. Past that, just scrub and fence posts. Jessa wrapped her shawl tighter. It's quiet. Too quiet. She looked toward the creek that bordered the far edge of the property. No. I think it's the kind of quiet I can breathe in. Porter ran a hand through his hair, the wind tugging loose strands at his neck. I know how to build a second porch rail. We can put a bench out here. I'd like that. He turned to her. You ever learn to use a rifle? No. I was never allowed. I could teach you, if you want. Jessa studied his face in the falling light. I do. The next morning, she rolled her sleeves and helped him clear the shed. They hauled out rusted tools and a rotted saddle, swept the floor, and nailed a blanket over the open frame of the window until they could cut proper glass. Porter found a cot frame buried under hay, and by noon he had it propped against the wall, waiting for a new mattress. Willa followed them with a broom too large for her hands, sweeping circles in the dust and declaring it her castle. Later, as Jessa washed the grime from her arms at the pump, she asked, "Will you tell me about your brother?" Porter was oiling the hinges on the shed door. He paused, wiping his hands on a rag. "He's the opposite of me. Loud where I'm quiet, quick to laugh. He stayed in Rawlins after the war, took work making barrels. Got a wife now, 2 girls. You close, we were, then we weren't. I left for a while, tried my hand in Colorado. Didn't work out. You think he'll be glad to see you," a small shrug. "Guess I'll find out." That afternoon they walked into town. They needed flour, salt, and oil for the lamp. Jessa carried Willa on her hip the last quarter mile when the child's feet began to drag. Porter kept pace beside her, watching the path ahead. Rawlins was busier than Jackson had been, but not by much. A few wagons, a blacksmith hammering at a wheel rim, the whistle of the afternoon train in the distance. No one looked twice at her teeth here. No one laughed. Inside the mercantile, Jessa picked through bolts of muslin while Porter paid for supplies. The shopkeeper, a man in his 60s with wire spectacles and a voice like dry corn husks, counted coins without comment. "You're new out this way," he said to Jessa as she folded the cloth. "Yes." "We settled south of the creek," he nodded. "That your little one?" "She is." "She's got your eyes." Jessa smiled softly. "People say that." They left with a sack of goods strung across Porter's shoulder and Willa clutching a small tin whistle the shopkeeper had slipped into her hand. That night they lit the lamp and ate apples and fried cornmeal cakes. Willa fell asleep with the whistle tucked under her pillow, and Jessa stood at the window, watching the sky turn violet. Porter came to stand beside her. "You miss it yet?" he asked. "No," she said without hesitation. "I don't." He looked at her then, not as a guest in his home, but as something more, something settled. "I've been thinking," he said. "We could plant beans come spring, maybe even a row of squash. That's a good plan. And another room added on, not just for her. For us." Jessa turned, the lamp behind her casting gold through her hair. "You sure?" "I've never been surer." She reached up, touching the side of his face. "Then let's build it." He kissed her there, gentle and certain, nothing hurried or unsure. When their foreheads came together, she rested there, eyes closed, her breath steady. Outside, the wind rattled through the dry grass, but inside their walls held. By late August, the scent of sage hung low in the air, and the mornings came sharper, kissed with the first hint of coming frost. Jessa hung laundry behind the house, the damp weight of linens tugging at the line as she secured each corner with wooden pegs. Willa chased grasshoppers in the dry weeds with a tin pail, her braid bouncing against her back. Porter had gone into Rawlins before sunrise, promising to be back by supper. He needed nails and a pane of glass for the shed window, and he wanted to speak with the pastor about something he hadn't named outright. Jessa hadn't pressed. She knew the shape of quiet intentions when she saw them. She rubbed her palms together and stepped off the porch to gather the eggs. The hens had taken to laying in the shade beneath the corral fence, and she found 4 warm shells nestled in the soft dust. As she straightened, she noticed a figure on horseback cresting the rise near the creek. The rider wore a broad hat and carried himself with a loose, easy posture, one hand resting on the saddle horn. When he drew close, Jessa saw he was older than Porter, with a heavy beard and a coat mended at the elbows. He dismounted slowly, favoring one leg. "Afternoon," he called. She nodded, wary but polite. "You need something?" Looking for Porter Talcott. "Heard he might be staying out this way. He'll be back before dark." The man slid his hat off and wiped his brow. "I'm Illy, his brother." She stepped forward. "I'm Jessa." Illy studied her a moment, then turned his eyes toward Willa, who had crouched behind a barrel watching him. "And that one, she's with us." He scratched at his beard. "Looks like he's put some roots down. Looks like he means to keep them." Illy leaned against the post. "He wrote once, after he left the mountains. Said he'd come back when he had something to show for himself. Never figured he'd actually do it." Jessa folded her arms. "He has. I can see that." They stood in silence a moment, the wind tugging at the corner of the drying sheet. "Mind if I wait on him?" Illy asked. "You can sit with me on the porch." By the time Porter returned, the sun was low and the sky was streaked with the pale pink of evening. He spotted the second horse tied beneath the tree and froze halfway to the gate. "You look like you saw a ghost," Illy called, rising from the porch bench. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I wasn't sure I would either." They met halfway between the fence and the door. No handshakes, just a brief silence before Illy clapped a hand on Porter's shoulder. "You look tired," he said. "I'm building something," Porter answered. "I can tell." Jessa watched them from the doorway, Willa leaning against her side, thumb hooked into the curve of her apron. That night, Illy stayed for supper. He told stories about the fire that had nearly taken his cooper shop, and the mule that had tried to bite him on 3 separate occasions. Willa laughed until she hiccuped, and Jessa found herself smiling with her whole face, unguarded. Afterward, when the dishes were stacked and the lamp turned low, Porter walked her out to the edge of the corral. The stars blinked clear and sharp above them, and the air smelled of dry grass and ash from the stove. "He asked me if I meant to marry you," Porter said. Jessa turned to him slowly. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him I already did, somewhere between the gate in Jackson and the first night under your roof." She pressed a hand to her chest. "You sure he doesn't think that's foolish?" "I didn't ask him to." They stood close, the night wrapping around them like a wool blanket. "I thought I'd never be wanted," she said, voice soft. "You're not just wanted," he said. "You're home." She reached for him then, not out of uncertainty, but with the calm strength of someone who had survived long loneliness, and now stood sure on new ground. He kissed her slow, there beneath the stars, and when they stepped back inside, Willa was already curled in her bed, the whistle resting beside her hand. Jessa tucked the blanket higher over the child's shoulders, then turned to find Porter watching her from the doorway. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'll ask the pastor." She nodded once. "And I'll say yes before you finish the question." In the quiet that followed, the house felt full, no echoes, no gaps, just belonging. The wedding was held beneath the cottonwood Porter had planted 5 years earlier, when half the land still lay wild, and the house stood alone against the wind. The tree had grown tall, its limbs full and green, casting shade over the yard where Willa strung ribbons between fence posts. The pastor rode out from Rawlins with a leather-bound book and a quiet smile, and he brought a crate of preserved peaches, each jar sealed with wax and care. Jessa wore a dress she'd sewn from the muslin she'd picked weeks before, the fabric dyed soft green with boiled sage and copper nails. Her hands didn't tremble as she tied her hair back with a strip of cotton, nor when she stepped barefoot into the grass where Porter waited. He wore his cleanest shirt and the same boots he'd walked into Jackson with, soles worn but mended. Willa stood between them, holding a length of twine she'd twisted into a bracelet. "For both of you," she said, offering it with solemn pride. "So you never forget to hold on." Porter knelt and tied it around Jessa's wrist, then kissed the top of Willa's head. "We won't forget." The vows were brief and plain-spoken. When the pastor asked, Porter replied, "With every piece of me." Jessa answered, "Always." No one cried, but he turned away for a moment and pressed his thumb to his eye. That night, they ate by lantern light at the table Porter had built from salvaged pine. The window panes caught the orange glow and held it steady, while Jessa served peach cobbler in chipped bowls. Willa leaned against Porter's side, the hem of her dress dusty from dancing barefoot in the yard. After the dishes were cleared and the lamp trimmed low, Jessa stepped outside alone. The wind had gone still, and the stars hung heavy over the ridgeline. She heard the door creak behind her but didn't turn. "You think we'll be happy here?" Porter asked softly. "I know we will." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You're not afraid anymore." She reached up and laced her fingers through his. "I was never afraid of the work. I was afraid no one would see the worth in it. I do. Every bit." They stood like that until the chill began to rise off the earth. Inside, Willa had already fallen asleep on the pallet beside their bed, the twine bracelet tucked beneath her cheek. That winter, Porter built the extra room with Ellie's help. It took 2 weeks of sawing and hammering in wind that stung their eyes, but they finished before the snow came. Jessa stitched thick curtains from wool remnants a neighbor traded for eggs, and Willa filled the windowsill with stones she'd collected from the creek. The room stayed warm. By spring, the beans pushed green fingers through the earth. Jessa taught Willa how to press seeds into the ground, and Porter carved a sign for the gate post that read, "Talcott Homestead." He burned the letters with a hot nail and sealed the wood with linseed oil. One morning, Jessa brought in the last of the dried herbs from the shed and found Porter sitting at the table, a hand-drawn map of the property laid out in front of him. "You planning to sell?" she asked, teasing. "No, I'm thinking ahead, fencing off the north acre for grazing. That'll make room for a second cow." She poured coffee into 2 tin cups. "You think we'll need that much milk?" "If we have more mouths," he said, eyes meeting hers. She paused, then smiled. "You don't miss much. I've been watching you move different these days." She set the cup in front of him. "It's early yet," he nodded. "I'm glad." In the years that followed, they added a henhouse and a storm root cellar. Willa grew tall and clever, with a sharp laugh and a heart that stretched wide. She called Porter Pa without being asked, and he called her my girl every time she brought in firewood taller than herself. Jessa gave birth to a son the following spring, in the quiet hours just before dawn. Porter never left her side. He held the child with reverence, as though the weight of him reshaped everything else. They named him Matthew, after the man who'd once taught Porter to carve wood with patience and to speak plainly when it mattered most. In time, the house stood framed by 3 trees and a garden that overflowed with squash and tomatoes. The porch had a bench long enough for all of them, and in the evenings they sat together and watched the sun slip behind the hills, hands linked, the past folded behind them like an old quilt worn, but no longer heavy. And in every quiet moment that followed, they lived without fear. With each shared glance, every small touch, they reminded one another they had built this life together. Rooted in trust, shaped by care, and held steady by love that had never needed grand promises, only presence and the will to stay.